Hi folks, it's Maximus Mark. I'm like a kid on Christmas Day. I'm interviewing someone very special today, Randy Roach. Randy is the author of the book Muscle, Smoke and Mirrors, which is an absolutely fantastic read. Today will be a little bit like that scene in The Matrix where Morpheus turns to Neo and he says, do you want the blue pill or the red pill? Today you're going to hear things that you may not have heard before, and if you've heard it, you're probably dying to know more information from a really reliable source. Well, today I have that reliable source in Randy. Randy has been studying the world of nutrition for over 30 years. He has studied its origins, its roots, the formation, and ultimately its political corruption. Welcome, Randy, and thank you so much for taking your time out, for sharing the knowledge that you've been acquiring writing your book, Muscle, Smoke and Mirrors.
Oh, no problem, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Most welcome. So it's becoming more common knowledge that our soil is depleted. I've seen people suggest that the soil was on the decline as far back as the 1940s. When did the state of the soil really start to decline, and why?
I would say the soil started declining probably several centuries ago when we came over and started farming it like we did. I was actually surprised too to find out that chemical farming was already well underway 100 years ago. And, as soon as you start plowing and turning over the soils, then you start the erosion in terms of just eroding soils. But once the soils become depleted, we never really advanced ourselves with proper cyclical agriculture in terms of putting back in the land what we take out. We migrated to this. We can put back to chemical means, and like I said, I was surprised to find fungicides, pesticides, herbicides. They were all chemically being put on land as far back as 100 years ago. So we started depleting our land long ago. I think a lot further back from 1940. It's just probably much worse now with companies like Monsanto totally disrupting the whole farming process all around the world in terms of using GMO crops and to make them resilient to their Roundup, and in Iraq and in many places where they have come in and totally disrupted centuries-long tradition of fairly sustainable agriculture. But like I said, our soils now are in bad condition.
Okay. So do you think it's just for profit of the farmer, or is there more at play there?
People will debate this issue in terms of whether it's an argument that we have to feed more people, so we have to do it this way. But it's all... when you look at this, you find that the industrial entrepreneur will always win out. It's always more industry, and everything in our Western culture is more and more chemicals, and that seems to be the driving force in terms of you can't say did they purposely ruin our food supply, or probably not purposefully, but in terms of when you look at how they wanted to take control of the food supply, when I say they, I'm talking about the shapers, the movers and the shapers of the way the world is going into more and more control in the hands of less and less people. We're being globalized, and the food supply is being globalized, internationalized. You can see this going back decades, back in the 30s and 40s when countries decide we can't feed ourselves. They have to import. You look at all around the world now, even going down to the islands of St. Lucia, where they have all this wonderful indigenous food, but it's all exported out. And if you go to eat down there, it's all food that's been imported in. Every country has been made now to export all their resources and then to import things back, basically creating this crazy carbon footprint that is cost so much the way we do it now in terms of developing and sustaining one's own resources. So, again, there are some dubious hands at work in terms of orchestrating the way the food is produced and stuff today, but it's of course a lot of money is involved.
Okay. Because
much more so than the well-being of the food product. The food has been totally compromised, and they can't argue that for the sake of for the dollar.
Okay. So that the soil has been depleted. Would you think there is a need for supplementation to make up that difference?
Again, that's not a debatable question. What is, in terms of the integrity of supplements, I don't really know. I don't think there's really been great long-term studies done on the true benefits of supplements and high-dose supplements. Our food fractions, our bodies have come along not understanding and not taking food in that manner. Again, we don't know if it is straining us in certain situations or helping us in situations. So I'm leery about supplements. I would like to think that they did work because it'd be a great magic fix, but we've been dousing supplements down our throats for 60 years, 70 years. It's done nothing to stop the epidemic of degenerative disease. And we'd probably take most vitamins and minerals over in North America than anybody in the world. So I can't answer that accurately. I'm leery about the efficacy of supplements. Many out there will say adamantly that I'm wrong, that they do work, but they may appear to work or do things short term, but on a long term, I like to see studies done where the subjects are taken through gestation, through pregnancies, and to see what happens when the fetus is developing and in its early growing years, how if supplements help or hinder with certain diets. So I really didn't answer your question, but I do still take a few in terms of food concentrates, fermented cod liver oil, and low temperature produced camu, which is the camu plants. It's not so much food fractionated; they're just more concentrated concentrates of foods with high amounts of, say, vitamin C or vitamin A and vitamin D or iodine or EPA and DHA, stuff like that.
So, how much control do you think that pharmaceutical companies have over supplements?
Oh, they have control of many supplement companies are owned by pharmaceuticals, but they don't control all supplement companies. But they are definitely are strong power internationally in getting regulation that's to force supplements out. There have been some through the decades. Some successful supplement companies have been bought up by pharmaceuticals and then basically run out of business within a few years. But pharmaceutical companies are also profiting off supplements, even though they would like people all to be on drugs because they can't really patent anything that's natural in supplements. So they would eventually like to see them put out, and they are doing this very well there in terms of Codex Alimentarius and being behind the United States FDA, USDA, Canada's Health Canada, and producing regulations that are just strangling the hell out of the supplement companies. And, putting on a lot of BS, we're doing it to protect you, and there's hardly any notable death from supplement as compared to the hundreds of thousands that die each year from the direct result of toxicity of taking pharmaceutical drugs.
Yeah, definitely. Now you mentioned
they have their hand in there. Sorry, they do. They absolutely have their hand in there, but they don't have total control. They would like total control. They like to get rid of them.
Do you think they'll ever get total? Do you think they'll ever get total control?
Oh, they may, but it won't last. For them to have total control, they would have to be in a global tyranny, because they can't lie. They can't put us all and force us all in the drugs. Now you're talking about a global dictatorship. I don't believe that's going to happen. But they're trying to, in terms of control and greed. But they're having a lot of trouble, and then it's a lot of it's falling apart on them as well. But they've been doing this for years, and there's a lot of money behind these global initiatives. It goes back to the League of Nations back in 1921 after World War I, and the formation of the Council of Foreign Relations and the Royal Institute of International Affairs. These are all global initiatives put out there, but not one just particular country. It's like the Federal Reserve thing in the United States. Most people, absolutely, probably the majority, think the Federal Reserve is an American institution. It's not. It's privately owned. It's the way they name things that people think, they're put out by this country, that country. But these are pure global initiatives that are put out by people who I would just call global architects. They have no alliance to any country. They want world government, and they've been working on it for a long time. It used to be conspiracy talk, but it's not conspiracy anymore. It's quite evident that they want international guidelines, international laws, and that's why we have NAFTA and GATT over here, the World Trade Organization, and you see the European Union. 50, 60 years ago, people would have laughed at the notion of all those European countries getting together to share a currency and trade and that. And they're working on the North American Union. It's all covertly over here. So there's still people today deny that there's the North American Union behind the scenes and the Merrill being on the works. But they are now starting to break the surface of mainstream media and talking about it. So those, like I said, it's happening. But again, with in order for them to do that, they want to have basically the food supply international, globalized, and controlled.
Okay. You mentioned Codex Alimentarius. Can you explain to our listeners who have never heard of Codex what exactly that is and how that's going to have a big impact on nutrition and supplements?
Well, look at who the hell would know what Codex Alimentarius means? It's Latin. Why would they name it that? They name it that so you and I don't know what it is, and we don't. It's just jargon. Jargon was created to keep people out of the conversation, and to keep it monopolized, keep it controlled. So they call it Codex Alimentarius, which basically means food guidelines. Alimentarius, basically, I guess, Latin for the GI tract, in Codex in terms of some type of hierarchical structure. But it is basically international food guidelines. And the matrix of this, it all came out of basically the World Health Organization, and initiatives for it go quite a ways back, but more so after World War II when the United Nations got launched. And the World Health Organization spawned from that, and the Food and Agriculture Association. And basically, the matrix for it was laid down in 1962. Like I said, everything starts as recommendations and guidelines. But sure enough, there's a mandated behind-the-scenes agenda to eventually make them law. Now, it lay dormant for quite a few decades until I believe the World Trade Organization started to pick up, and they were going to adopt these guidelines now as their law. So all countries involved with the World Trade Organization, they would be more favorable. The laws of international laws would fall on their side in terms of even food regulation, and because remember, everybody's importing and exporting now, right? And so this is how they basically sneak these things in, and next thing you know, you're dealing with new laws here internationally. But like I said, there's lots of litigation going on, lots of fighting going behind the scenes. The mainstream media doesn't cover any of it. They never have covered any of this, and that's their job. They're not to cover it. It's basically been a blackout, media blackout on many of the things going on. And like even in Canada, where these ridiculous licensing laws that have been putting out on the supplement industry, which would force so many people, small distributors, out of business because they can't afford to do it. But again, you're not seeing it in the mainstream media. They're not talking about it. So it's up to the person, the individual person who watches TV and reads just a traditional newspaper. That's their source of news. They don't know what's going on, and then they wonder what happened to certain things have just suddenly disappeared because they weren't aware of what's going on behind the scenes in terms of certain laws that have been put out without their knowledge.
So you also mentioned the globalization process. Now, could you just elaborate on that for our listeners?
Well, like I said, that's been going on for 100 years. And I'm going to talk more about this in Volume 3 of my book because in Volume 1, I talked about basically the reformation, basically the takeover of the American Medical Association back in 1910 with philanthropic money, such as from the Rockefeller Foundation or the Rockefeller Institute of Medical Research and the Carnegie Endowment Fund with Dr. Simon and Abraham Flexner, who worked for those two organizations, and they helped in terms of reformatting the American Medical Association, which was not very impressive at the time. They basically they weren't dominant. Their homeopathy, chiropractic, naturopathy, they were fairly prominent as well in terms of choices for medical care. But with this insurgence of this money and reforming along the lines of scientific method, pharmacology, research labs, naturopaths, homeopaths, and chiropractors, they don't use drugs, so they weren't going to receive any funding in those schools. So eventually all those schools shut down, and basically the new paradigm of medicine, which was going to be drug-based, took control. And again, these tax shelters, the Carnegie Endowment Fund and the Rockefeller and Guggenheim and Ford, they were all basically, they spawned onto the scene like crazy between 1910 in 1930 because these foundations weren't going to be taxed, because they created these shelters because these same who I would call the global architects. These are the very wealthy. People who control banking, people who control oil, people who control pharmaceuticals. They were highly instrumental in bringing into the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 in the United States, which took power from Congress to making money and putting it into the private sector, which was the Federal Reserve. Again, never audited. By the 1950s, there were many people concerned with what was going on in terms of the American education system, and more questions were asking who is influencing this education system and what is going on with these tax shelters. Who and what are they? What is the money being spent on? Why are they never audited? And Congressman Eugene Cox, I think in 1951 or 52, got congressional approval to investigate them, but he died. And then Congressman Carol Reese, a prominent Republican politician, took over the investigation, and he hired Norman Dodd as his director of research. And in turn, Norman Dodd hired Catherine Casey, who was a young lawyer, who he assigned to go and research the Carnegie Endowment Fund and the Rockefeller Foundation. They were told you're under investigation, and Catherine Casey went to read the minutes of the meeting at the Carnegie Endowment Fund back in just around World War I. And she couldn't believe what she was reading at that time in terms of these elitists talking about taking over the American education system, teaching kids, indoctrinating kids into collectivist thinking along the lines of the socialist Soviet Union, and basically taking apart the United States. And she just could not deal with what she was reading, and she literally lost her mind. She had to be institutionalized, according to Norman Dodd. She saw in those minutes of the meetings this Carnegie Endowment Fund, these elitists talking about the advantages of world wars to consolidate power. Hence, World War I, you got the League of Nations out of 10. Hence, World War II, you had the United Nations. Exactly what she's reading, you're seeing it happen and transpire, these attempts to start to centralize power and globalize. There's all sorts of, in terms of theories, in terms of what's going on with these secret societies and, the Club of Rome and the Illuminati. It's all different names. But the fact of the matter is it is happening, and they are doing it. The history clearly shows that, and it's very well documented. But many people have written on it. Professor Carroll Quigley, who was, I think, one of the professors for President Clinton. Clinton used to quote him. Carroll Quigley was a professor at Oxford, and he wrote a 1,000-page book called Tragedy and Hope, because he said he worked at the top level of this agenda, and he says he agrees with it. He just didn't agree with the fact that they chose to do it covertly in terms of globalizing this planet, in terms of basically a world government. And again, the thinking is that some of our best minds, I guess they determined themselves to be our best minds, got together decades back and decided that if there isn't a global initiative, efforts to basically get things under control on this planet, that we would have basically a social, economic implosion by the middle of this century. Because if we did not, so there was people who earnestly believed in it, that we have to have, they watch, the same as like Star Trek. You watch Star Trek, the Federation, and everybody's of one mind, right? Everybody's of one law, and to keep things from getting crazy. But back to that congressional investigation in the 50s. Of course, they were talking about these people have a lot of power, and they were able to shut down the investigation. But both Norman Dodd and Congressman Carroll Reese, behind closed doors, were told things, and basically that we are going to a world government, and there's nothing that we can do about it. And they do not want they could not have the United States and North America way up here, high up in economic status with the rest of the world down. They wanted it balancing out, but they weren't going to meet midway. Basically, they're going to pull down the United States economy and our social standing down below, closer to where the rest of the world was, instead of bringing the rest of the world up. And that's why we've seen from that point on in the 50s, they called it the deindustrialization of the United States. Basically, start tearing down the protective tariffs. Before, it doesn't matter if Mexico or any country, international country, wanted to use slave labor. They weren't going to, those products were going to get slapped with a tariff at the border, and they weren't going to be able to saturate our markets. But they started to tear them down and let them come in. So out went the textile industry, out went the shoe industry, the electrical industry, the computer industry. It was by design. It was by design, and it took them even longer, but finally did enough damage to the auto industry. There's books and books written about it. Farewell America, 1967, a book called Farewell America. I had to find it. It was banned in the United States. It was talking about much of this. They got a little bit into the Kennedy assassination as well, but it was mostly about deindustrializing the United States. So it's the only way that explains what's gone on in the United States in the past years, where everybody can't figure out why they're so in debt. How can you be so stupid to get yourself in that position? Well, they're not stupid. It's by design. It's like Donald Trump was on Larry King about a month or two ago, calling his political leaders stupid, that the United States no longer makes anything. He was saying that even his Chinese contact friends are saying, we can't believe what you're allowing us to get away. And Donald said, our people are stupid. I think Trump knows better. He knows they're not stupid. It was by design. That's the only way you can get to where we are, is by design. So in a nutshell, that's basically the globalization process. And like I keep saying, that involves the annexing of the world's food supply. And that's why you see these huge international corporations, Monsanto, ADM, these guys in the GMO, products and farming and stuff. And it's scary. Frankenfoods. It's, cold pasteurization, irradiating foods, chemical applications by the tons. It's been basically a bad road for her in terms of food. We are so far off the natural path of what food and health is supposed to be. It's going to be interesting to see how we can reel it back.
Wow. So obviously there's a lot of different things that you've raised there. Before I do move on, I just wanted to ask you quickly, can you just explain a little bit more about cold pasteurization? This is something you mentioned to me previously, but for our listeners who haven't heard of cold pasteurization, could you just talk about the bit about the history of that?
I first read about it 23 years ago. Harvey Diamond was writing about it in one of his Fit for Life books about basically bringing up the point. Back in the 80s, you're probably too young to remember, but the big talk was what we're going to do with the nuclear waste. And he goes, you don't hear about it anymore because they decided they're going to feed it to us. Basically, I thought it was ridiculous. I thought there's no way that they're going to take this irradiation, this nuclear waste, and produce all these small irradiation plants all around the country and irradiate food and tell us that it's good for us, that's how it's going to preserve shelf life, prolong shelf life. And they're going to call it pico waves at the time. But there's no such thing as any scientific term as pico wave. And I had kind of drifted away from that. And then until several years later, I saw something about cold pasteurization. I'm thinking, what's cold pasteurization? I know what pasteurization is. It's heating. It's basically, but so you look it up, and sure enough, it's using radiation to pasteurize food. So there's a lot of foods being pasteurized right now. Again, the labeling, the power of these food companies is huge. And redefining organics, they can hide everything in the labels. They were able for years to hide trans fats, lie about trans fats, and to basically hide the fact that certain foods have been irradiated. And people are always fighting to get to expose us, to have to make the label properly so you know what you're getting. But I remember a couple of years ago, there was in the alternative news, not the mainstream news, never the mainstream news, that there was a big battle on because there was an outcry that the USDA allowed this cold pasteurized meat to be sold to kids at school. So and now coming across the borders, people are wondering, all nuts, they were going to make it mandatory that all nuts have to be irradiated. But again, the nut company was fighting back, and it's going to sue the FDA. It was the USDA, one of the two. They're going to sue them because they have no right to do that, to declare everything's has to be subjected to radiation like that. But that's why you always see. Remember, I told you in order to globalize the population, you have to globalize the food supply. So you have to nationalize and internationalize it. In order to internationalize the food supply, you have to sterilize it because foods are perishable. Like real healthy food should be a local cottage industry and indigenous. But because of the perishability of foods, they have to sterilize it. So in order for them to justify all the sterilization, they have kept on a decades-long fear campaign that germs are so bad, germs are going to kill you. They're absolutely ridiculous. Like, they made us into this total germ-phobic culture, and with absolute lies about the truth about germs and our symbiotic relationship with germs in order to keep us fearful, so they can justify pasteurizing everything, pasteurizing milk, irradiating meats, irradiating nuts, so they can prolong it and ship it further and store it longer. And they'll never talk about the truth on mainstream TV. You got to search and research it for yourself to get to the truth about that. But we have the egg scare. We have the broccoli thing. The peanut butter. So it's these big companies that are responsible. It's not very seldom, if ever, the small companies or the small farms that do it, because they do proper farming. Whereas these big agribiz, gigantic companies that just do factory farming that are doing all the destruction and basically risk having contaminated foods. But again, that's basically cold pasteurization, and just as one of the food bastardization processes, and others being obviously genetically modifying it and labeling with so many sprays and chemicals.
Now, you mentioned the germs and bacteria, and that we've all been scared of that. Now, you eat your food raw. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about why is that? What was the turning point for you? What did you discover that made you think, okay, I'm gonna have to turn raw and eat my food raw?
There were a number of reasons. Like I said, I've been studying nutrition for over 30 years, and it wasn't always for bodybuilding. It's because I wanted to try to help the blinding process. I was losing my eyesight from Stevens-Johnson syndrome. So I experimented with a lot of things. And I came to, in terms of reading alternative health, and also, don't get me wrong, I went through all the orthodox mainstream medicine, and that's what did me all the damage. Years of drugs, botched more surgeries than you can believe. But I learned that, even the pioneers of bodybuilding, in terms of building muscle, they used a lot of raw milk, and like guys like Toronto and others, some of them ate raw meat and found that there was such a major difference. And that made sense to me, that why cook the food is, how long have we been cooking food? Why would we cook it? No other animal on the planet eats food cooked. So we're the only ones that do that, process and cook foods. So I started drinking raw milk about over 10 years ago, and then it took about 8 years ago raw meat. Now, I had been culturally indoctrinated as well, so I was fearful. I was fearful of the chicken quite a bit, so that it took me another year before I'd even try the chicken. And once I did, I liked it very much, but I've told the story before that because I was sight impaired, I would cut some of it and leave the other part on the counter as I ate the other stuff, and then I'd forget about it because I didn't see it, and then I put my hand on it later, and then I thought, I just throw it out. I'm not going to eat that. It's been sitting there for an hour, 2 hours, and I kept doing that, and finally I got tired of throwing this stuff out. This is perfectly good. I was just afraid to eat it because it sat there too long. Salmonella was going to kill you. So for one day, I was sitting out there for a good 8 hours in the summertime, and when I put my hand on it, it was actually starting to get hard. So I thought, oh, the hell with it. I ate it anyways, and again, nothing. There wasn't anything. Again, because when I do raw eggs, I can't see what I'm popping in the glass. Sometimes I'll just pop it, bang, slam it back. And the one time, a few years ago, I swallowed a bad egg, and I knew it was bad. And my mind started playing, should I go throw that up? Or it's going to make me sick? I didn't. I let it go. I got a bit of a stomach ache, but I was really wondering if I had brought that on myself. So the next time I did it, I knew just before I swallowed it, it was bad. But I swallowed it anyways. I thought, nothing's going to happen. And I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel nothing. There was nothing happened to me at all. Now, I out of curiosity, I will sniff the egg just to see what it's like. But again, we're told all these things, that the salmonella is so dangerous for us. But, come on. I used to do that. You eat raw chicken, you want to scour the whole damn counter, the sink, everything, just because before you cooked it. And here I am eating the chicken 8 hours old, and I had a friend who was fighting with cancer. She was eating raw chicken that was aged for 2 months. We had to go, my deck, it stunk so bad. It didn't do anything. So what's going on? Why are they telling us all this? Yeah, sure, you must be careful with, I'll tell you, the only times I have ever got feeling sick from eating meat was when I was eating cooked food, but I was still severely visually impaired. I would cook it, but if I didn't cook it enough, and then I put it in the fridge and maybe had it a day or two later, that's when I got, because that's when aggressive bacteria feeds on dead matter. And when you cook the meat, and same with pasteurizing milk, you create a wonderful environment for bacteria to flourish. When you take raw milk from cows who are fed grass, you can enter the Campylobacter or the E. coli strain, and it won't survive. It's the wrong environment. But again, they don't tell you any of that. They just scare the hell out of you, constantly scare you. Especially the raw milk paranoia is absolutely insane. They have done a really good job of indoctrinating the people to be absolutely terrified. They almost treat raw milk like a biological hazard. It's ridiculous.
So do you source your meats from any particular place? Do you have to source your meats? I mean, can you eat raw from the supermarket, or does it have to be bought from a farm?
When you I'd never eat any ground beef from the supermarket, because 1 pound of ground could come from 100 different cows, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like the milk. They collect the milk from all the different farms in a great big tanker truck, and it's all mixed together, then boiled together and processed together. And it doesn't matter. The farmers don't care how they farm, because they know it's all going to get boiled. It's same with the general supermarket meat. A lot of that ground beef is just piled together. I know my farm. I know my butcher. And my sources of meat, yes, you do have to source. And you have to be respectful to the foods that you eat. And I get natural beef. Yeah, sometimes it's just not all grass. It's hard to get all grass fresh. But as long as it's not on hormones. But ultimately, the best is fresh, unfrozen, pure grass-fed beef, because it's the constitution of the meat is different. Basically the fat makeup is different, the ratios are different. There's other factors in terms of vitamin C being in the meat, and this is, again, most people don't realize how nutrient dense meat is, especially grass fed.
Okay, and you mentioned you don't freeze the meat. Why is that? Are you not a believer in freezing meat? No,
freezing damages it. Maybe not as bad as heating, but again, freezing cracks itself. And that does damage to the meat. Again, obviously, look at cultures have been around. Even the Hunza, one of the healthier cultures in the world, they cooked a fair amount of the food, but they also dried their meat too. They didn't eat it. They would boil some meat, but they also sun-dried the meat at lower temperatures and such. But obviously, it's not. It's just more. I would say more degenerate. Like, I look at food as being how alive it is biologically in terms of communication with the body. I find, I used to be able to eat meat. I could put sauces on, trick my body being a lot of it, but then I'd pay for it the next day. It'd come out of me. I knew I didn't digest it properly. When I just eat pure raw meat, I know how much I can eat. My body just stops me. It's just the food processes as well have really mastered in bypassing our satiety points by making foods now that you can just, especially carbohydrate foods, where you can just eat tons of it. I remember when I never really ate potato chips, but years ago, I maybe have a handful of chips, and that'd be enough. I wouldn't want any more. It's just, whether it was the salt content or whatever, I just couldn't eat anymore. Didn't want anymore. Then now recently, I bought some because I was having people over. And I even went to the health department, the natural food part of it, the grocery store, and bought the best ones. And I tried one. Hey, that's pretty good. I ended up eating the whole bag. I didn't understand that I could eat more. I said, how did I do that? I said, I ate that whole bag. I smoked it. And it's like, you look at the ingredient list, and whatever they've done, they're able to make me just be able to eat more and more and more and more food.
Yeah.
So it's amazing how it's amazing how they can duplicate any taste. You had over in Australia, you guys had those little the little jelly beans with their root beer popcorn.
Yeah.
Every single taste they can duplicate. Right?
Yeah, watermelon. Yeah. I know.
So like I said, it started 100 years ago. Our body's their market. It's just it's a bonanza of crap out there that they're trying to shove into us to make money.
So with the raw food, is there any certain preparation, or is it just cut and eat?
I cut and eat. I have young friend, he's got good culinary skills. He likes to make sauces and do things a little more fancy, but because I was damaged from Stevens-Johnson syndrome of my intestinal tract, I am very base. I'm anaphylaxis. I mean, I got to be very careful. That means your throat can close on certain reactions. Not to peanuts or anything like that, but for me, like paprika biting into certain hot, spicy foods and stuff aren't good for me. I've improved quite a bit since doing raw, but I'm very careful in what I eat. So when I eat meat, I eat just plain. I might have some raw cheese with it, or whereas some other people do use olive oils and garlic and make sauce that are actually quite good. I tried them, but I like to stay really bland. And sometimes I dry my meat to 85 degrees and make something like a raw cheeseburger or something like that. But I mostly do like raw sirloin steaks and raw ground beef, and once in a while raw chicken, once in a while tuna. I find beef sits the best with me. So I'm able to eat so much more raw meat than I ever could eat cooked meat. So I can eat way more calories now. As a bodybuilder, my biggest problem was I could never eat enough food. I could easily get lean because I had no problem cutting my calories down, but my physiology just wouldn't allow me, my digestive system wouldn't allow me to take in the calories to produce the muscle that you need to take in a lot of calories. You look at the guys from the 50s and 60s, and the common denominators are those guys who got bigger before the real insurgence of drugs. They could take in a lot of food. They had this sound bodily constitution and physiology where they can take in a lot of calories and proteins and fats, a lot of proteins and fats. And it took me several years, because when I first started eating raw, I found I could only eat a quarter pound of raw meat at one time, and my body said, that's enough. I didn't want anymore. I ate anymore. I gagged. And even when I was hungry, even when you're hungry, anything tastes good. Even the raw meat tastes good. But a quarter pound, that was enough. But that's changed now. Now I can take in 3/4 of a pound at a time. I find 3/4 of a pound is optimal for me. I can do a pound, but so now I can do that 2 or 3 times a day if I want to. So I can take up to 3 pounds of meat a day, where I could never do that before. Unless I try to trick my body with the sugar sauces and cook it, but by the next day I didn't trick anything. I was coming flying out again, right?
Yeah.
So now, able to eat a lot of raw eggs, a lot of raw meat, raw dairy, and I'm able to, at my age now, I'm not so crazy about wanting to get really big, say like when I was in my 20s or 30s or whatever. So, but I still love training and working out. But the point is, at 50, I'm 50, going to be 52 this year. Typically, as you get older, you're starting to have to watch what you eat more, and having digestive. Mine have improved by going to raw food eating.
Have you ever had kangaroo?
No, I wouldn't mind trying it. Have you?
Yeah, it's a fantastic meat. Great.
Have you had it raw?
Yeah, I have had it raw. It's great. Yeah, I guess my biggest thing about raw meat, I guess the biggest hurdle that I'm still battling with is having it cold. I'm so used to having meat warm. And, it's probably, it's a minor thing, but it's funny. It does play, I guess, a psychological where you're eating something cold, where you're so conditioned to eating your meat warm.
Oh, yeah. The Western culture has been lulled. I don't know where else to say lulled to, but through cuisine. It's, people love to eat. And I don't blame them. Some people, you think they're just on this planet purely to eat, right? Some foods can taste so good. But you know what? I've come to really enjoy what I eat as well, because I don't eat a lot of sugars and spices. I really taste everything much more. In fact, when I go to eat something else that say cooked and prepared, it can be overbearing, and especially stuff now that's more chemical. You can almost taste it.
Yeah, you can.
It's crazy. But even just a little bit of like Himalayan sea salt sometimes is plenty if I want to do something like that. But typically when I eat the sirloin steak, I don't put anything on it. I just eat it like it is. But like I said, I'll take raw sort of ground beef and kind of dry that overnight. And again,
how do you dry it? You just dry it in the oven? Yeah,
for 24 hours. About lucky if it's 80 degrees in it, so it's very low temp. And I just put it in the fridge. I don't cover it. It's more or less full of bacteria or whatever, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't bother me. Then I might gently melt some raw cheese and put it on, and maybe with some tomato or pineapple, and it's very good. When you get into, if you want to get into more, tasteful things. Like when you get into raw honey and raw avocado, that's magic when those two come together. You want to chop like an apple and take raw avocado and raw honey and mix it together and chop an apple up and mix it. This is awesome. And same with that was one meat dish I did do. But even though I don't like to mix animal proteins with vegetable fats, I was getting some ground buffalo and having it ground fine, and then I would mix it with raw avocado and raw honey, and that was amazing. That was amazing. But you get into, like, if you get cork cheese and raw cork cheese and mix it with raw honey, it's just like cheesecake. If you just add like blueberries or fresh berries in season, it is just like cheesecake. Raw chocolate with raw butter and raw honey alone is really good. But then you can add just a bit of cold pressed coconut oil for a macaroon and some raw cocoa powder, and that's the real thing. That's the real chocolate, and it tastes awesome. So there are many foods out in the raw food camp that are actually quite good. But you know, our cultures just all around the world, we have, you know, just they all have their different ways of cooking foods, and they've all mastered over the centuries. And we were a species that just likes to eat. It's funny, like no other animal on the planet eats like that, but us. But you know, it's tough. It's tough for a lot of people to switch because exactly what you said. They like the meat warm or hot, you know, with their spices on it and tastes good. But I've come to enjoy it the way I eat it. And like I said, when you're hungry, anything tastes good.
True. You said you don't mix vegetable fats with animal fats. Why is that?
I won't digest it properly. I'll just
okay.
blow up. I tried doing that flaxseed oil way back with some meat, and wow, that was not a good mix at all.
No. Okay.
You know it, because I'm a performance eater. I eat in a manner that it doesn't bog me down because I'm working a lot of hours a day, sometimes like from 8 in the morning to midnight, and whether I'm training people or just writing, and I don't want to be sleeping in my chair. So I know how to what combines. It's a matter of learning your body. You know, bodybuilding is that's one good thing about it is you do come to learn your body, especially with raw food eating. You really come to learn your body and what mixes well with me, what doesn't mix well with me, and vegetable fats and animal proteins were not one. Even though I did get away with that honey, avocado, and ground buffalo, more so, but not so much with the oils. Mm. I like to just keep raw eggs with raw meat work very well for me. Raw eggs with raw chicken would work well. You'd think it would, since the chicken and the egg all come from the same source. But butter is I would tend to put with beef, but I'm careful with butter because raw butter detoxes. It's very powerful detoxifier, and I still have drugs coming out of me from way back. So I'm careful with how much butter I have.
Okay. And do you have your veggies raw as well, or do you lightly cook them? I mean, there's lectins in vegetables. Is that something we have to be concerned of? I
don't eat that many vegetables. I juice them. I can't. I just can't. I love the taste of them, but they just tear me up. I ate a whole carrot last night, and I just laid in bed. It woke me up at 4 o'clock. I just feel it going through me. It's just, I don't know what it is. I just don't digest them very well. And I can juice them fine. And I do juice carrot juice just from bodybuilding, whether taken with raw eggs. But I'll juice greens, parsley, celery, zucchini, carrots. Once in a while, I don't do much juicing with fruits, but I will treat myself once in a while. Mix it with some cream, so it's not too much of a sugar spike. But I will have some raspberries once in a while. Sometimes I have bananas with raw eggs. Again, if bananas can raise the blood sugar, so I'll have them with. But again, I don't do overly well with fruits and vegetables. My staples are meat, eggs, and dairy, and that's grass-fed. That dairy comes from grass-fed cows, and again, the eggs are pastured. But you got to remember, people say that's all you eat. You know, people have been kept alive solely on raw milk.
Yeah.
You know, Vegemar Stefan stay alive solely on meat. You know, so plus the eggs, I mix like the milk, the meat, the eggs. I serve some raw honey, some fruits, and some juiced vegetables, and some wine in the summer, and that keeps me alive. But I tried veganism for 4.5 years in the 1980s, and it was a disaster for me.
Yeah.
I lost all my strength as a bodybuilder. I mean, I stopped benching, I stopped squatting, I stopped deadlifting because I lost all my strength doing it. Yeah. And it took me 4.5 years to come to the realization I did damage to myself. And I know a lot of people now, that was back in the 80s, I've come to meet a lot of people in my life who have gone through that experience, some went longer than mine. Apparently there's a good book out there called The Vegetarian Myth by Leah Keith. She was 20 years of vegan, and she was involved with all aspects of veganism, politically, everything. And a whole group of her friends, they all abandoned it, and she was the last and the most stubborn, and she did the most damage to herself. And
wow.
I've not read the book. I've read some reviews on it. I'd like to get the book. I don't need to read it. I've done my own thing. I've even researching with Muscle, Smoke, and Mirrors and looking at all the vegans in the physical culture field, they all abandoned veganism. Some went to milk and egg vegetarianism, but pure veganism, they all abandoned. From even the late Jack LaLanne just died, Dr. Fred Tilney, Paul Bragg, Mark Berry, Bernard McFadden. They all at one point were doing veganism, and they abandoned it and started to eat some meat, or to have milk, dairy and eggs in their diet. And so, like the Harvey Diamond and Marilyn Diamond wrote the Fit for Life books. That's what influenced me in the 1980s, and they abandoned it. They were adamant. They just blamed dairy and meat on everything. Back then. But see, again, a lot of vegans, they don't delineate between properly raised cows, raw milk, and properly raised meats. I have no argument with them at all when it comes to factory farming and the major cattle and dairy industry, that stuff. I don't have that stuff. If I can't get raw milk, I probably wouldn't consume any dairy at all.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, they have not framed the argument properly at all, the vegans, and they have to realize the historical precedence of animal products and animal fats. It has far more precedence than what they're trying to push.
Absolutely.
And I've tried it. I can say I tried it. I tried it for real. 4.5 years was a good try, and I had to. It takes a lot when you're an adult to say, look, I've screwed up. I have to. Other people were commenting my skin was a mess in terms of what was happening, and to say to yourself, I got to stop this now. Because I was very opinionated about it. Hey, you try to push it on other people, and then you realize that you made a mistake. And again, I know this is a very sensitive issue with some people, but it's just that, like I said, over the past 20 years, I've met so many who have gone that same route and have abandoned it, and they're writing about it.
Yeah. And you mentioned before, you said, why cook food? Where did that really come from? And why cook food? Why not have everything raw? I'd just like to get a little bit more on that.
Well, I'd take anybody's guess. Like you got the paleo. There's all sorts of theories. There's a lot of evolutionary slants. There's a lot of creation slants. Even from a biblical perspective, this says we were vegan at the beginning, but something changed. A lot of from the spiritual angles, they did talk about veganism. And you know what? I had no problem. If that's the way it was then, that's the way it was. But that's not the way it is now. And that's something something did happen because I said, hey, I'd be a vegan if it was healthy. I said, I like the fruits and I like the vegetables. They just don't like me. But you get to the evolution where they try to pinpoint when we may have started using fire. I was just reading something about the Huns, and they talk about, again, from Greek mythology, who gave us fire, in terms of starting to cook foods and stuff. It's all theory. It's all speculation. When did fire come into play? How long ago? 5,000 years. Farming come in 6,000 years, 10,000 years. Who taught us to farm? They all speculate. You hear this. Some of the statements that are made by the doctors, PhDs, sound ridiculous. They say, 10,000 years ago, we domesticated cattle, and poof, just by chance, we evolved the gene to digest it. And I read that again. What did he just say? 10,000 years ago, we domesticated cattle, and poof, we evolved the gene to digest it. But that's a fairy tale. That's bullshit. It's just, come on, you want to try another one? It's, again, like I said, all this stuff is speculation and theory. They don't have any concrete facts as to when we started anything, or when anything came to bear. Because one theory will be absolutely countered anesthetically by another one. It's like everything in this world. It's black and white. There's a polar extreme to everything, isn't there? Even from training principles to veganism to meat eating. There's a polar to everything. It's a dual, I guess it's called dualism, whatever. But again, I don't know where it came to play. I tend to think it was not a good thing that happened, obviously, because I eat raw. Why it took off as it did, and I don't know. From a hunter-gatherer situation, take your pick, read your theory and whatever, read all the different theories, and eventually you just throw it all up in the air and say whatever. Just use common sense then. Just logically. Again, what you can't deny is the historical precedence of animal foods in our diet, cooked or raw, or combinations of two. It is Western Price clearly showed that. Even the amazing Hunza had dairy in their diet and some meat. The only reason they restricted their meat is because they didn't have it. It wasn't abundant to them, and they were very healthy. But Price, even Bob Hoffman, who wrote in 1940 Better Nutrition in the field of bodybuilding, noted the Maasai, the size of them, strength of them as compared to, I think, the Akakura tribe. They were, 6 inches taller, 30, 40 pounds bigger than that tribe that was more agrarian-based. They weren't total vegetarian, but they were more agrarian-based compared to the Maasai that drank the milk and the blood. These are big, strong guys.
Yeah.
These are the guys that were taken as slaves, and they're very, very strong and healthy. Not like what we've done to the African continent, basically destroyed it and destroyed their food supply. It's not the way it was 200-300 years ago. And even 60 years ago. Price actually studied these cultures at a very opportune time because they still were. He caught them halfway almost. They were still in their primitive state, but they were already starting to be compromised by civilization because the trading posts were there and there was commerce going on in their area. So he was able to actually study large families where half of them literally started to migrate towards our crap diet while the other ones stayed on their diets. And talking to doctors who worked with, say, the Eskimo for decades and saying he never saw tuberculosis and cancers in the Eskimo unless they went to an 8-hour diet, our canned meats, our white flour, sugar, and canned fruits. And he said all he could do was basically send them back to their indigenous ways and often reverse it. So he had his cameras. He had enough diagnostic tools to photograph and note all the. He was able to look at this from every single angle. I thought, the mainstream doesn't like it because he produced enough material to slam dunk just about every way we're practicing agriculture and handling our food supply today. But that's why his material in his book, Nutrition and Physical Generation, is not in schools anymore. It used to be required reading, I believe, in anthropology classes, but it's not. It's just because it's totally antithetical to the way we've gone, the direction we've gone in terms of our food supply. Dr. Rob McCarrison was showing the true cause and effect relationship in diet and disease. Dr. Francis Pottinger, yet the doctors to this day still don't take nutrition in the course. What the hell's with that? You can maybe make an argument 70, 80, 90 years ago. It's still not a very good argument back then because they were identifying vitamins and nutritionally deficiency diseases, scurvy, rickets, beriberi. They knew they started and identified them as vitamins. So they knew what it was, yet still to this day, nutrition is not taught. And the honest doctors will tell you, too, that it's totally a reactionary. Western medicine is totally reactionary. There's hardly anything for preventative. We'll treat the disease afterwards. And where you had guys like Dr. Rob McCarrison years back looking at it from a totally different perspective, looking at the Huns and say, why are you healthy? He doesn't want to look. He doesn't want to see a sick person try to take a crapshoot and try to figure out what's wrong, how to fix that. He wants to see a healthy person. Why are you healthy? And how can we keep you healthy? How can we get healthy? And he said the Hunzas were unmatched. The Sikhs and the Panthans, I think, two tribes were pretty close to the Hunza, but the Hunza. That's why in Muscle, Smoke, and Mirrors, the first volume, I compare the two guys through the 20th century bodybuilding mirrored very closely both the Hunza diet and the Eskimo. one being the dominant protein and fat with moderate to low carbohydrate, and the other one being almost a lacto vegetarian diet with either primarily with milk and egg or just milk and some meat, and based on 2 meals a day. Those dietary templates are extracted from the Hansa and from the Eskimo, and they were very close. Like Bernard McFadden, Lionel Strongford, and a number of others ate very close to the Hansa, where a lot of the strongman performers, like the Saxon brothers and Sandow, they ate more towards higher proteins and higher fats and not as much carbohydrate and starch in their diets.
But the key thing was they all had animal products.
They all had animal products.
Yeah.
So I don't probably study any pure vegan. Even you could in nature you really can't, because even you get insect larvae on the plants, and there's some type of animal products going to be in the process of your veganism. Only in North America is the way veganism is unprecedented, because our foods have been stripped clean with, well, number one, they're full of pesticides, but the way it's been cleaned, everything's been wiped off in terms of any residue from, say, what nature would put on it. But again, unfortunately, people have to just go through years. See, it's a matter of how long you last on it.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
So, from your years of research, what have you found to be the most shocking thing that you've discovered?
Probably some of the stuff I won't talk about on the show. In terms of nutrition,
yeah,
the lying of the food irradiating, that one blew me away. I just thought, come on, you got to be kidding! You're going to try to tell me that subjecting food to radiation is good for us? I remember reading the one thing. It will destroy bacteria. I forget the wording. It was absolutely ludicrous, the wording, and I was supposed to believe that. Basically, subjecting the food to radiation, that's going to be good for us. And from then on, it was just a slow awakening. It's like, hey, nothing's going to surprise me anymore. Okay, that doesn't surprise me. That doesn't surprise me. If they're going to radiate food, what else are they going to do to it? So there's nothing that actually horrifies me. Now, GMO foods are pretty scary. What they're trying to snuff out and hide and suppress is some of the studies are showing the animals eating this food and the offspring have all sorts of issues: sterile, sickly, half-life spans, and but they're trying to cover this up. And again, it's they're doing a lot of this stuff, genetic manipulation behind the scenes. We don't know what the hell they're doing. What they talk about in mainstream is only the tip of the iceberg of what they're doing covertly around various places around the world. But the GMO foods are something to be very concerned about, and especially when you got companies like Monsanto doing it. I mean, Vanity Fair just laid them right open in an article a few years ago. I don't know if they were sued or not, because I remember reading it thinking, well, Vanity Fair is mainstream media. They're not going to tear apart Monsanto without trying to, salvage it at the end, redeem them at the end, and they didn't. They just tore them from pillar to post straight through. So they must be afraid of Monsanto's as well, having to, basically the way they're messing with the food supply and the small farmers and the lawsuits that are going on. That's fairly disturbing stuff.
Yeah. What do you think is the biggest problem with nutrition today?
Garbage food.
Garbage food.
Actually, the ignorance. When I say ignorance, it's not the people's fault. We're born into a culture. We would like to think that our governing bodies are sincere and honest in looking after us. They are not. They are basically controlled by these corporations. They're put in office by these corporations. But we go back, say, when I was younger, growing up in the 60s, there's no way my parents or my generation's parents would ever suspect or could figure out that something was rotten in Denmark, right? I mean, because at that point, it was we lived in the greatest societies in the world. We have, look at the technology we have, look at the freedom we've been told we had, and everything was honky-dory, and we would never question it. So you can't get mad at people when they look at you and like you're crazy if you're eating raw, because why are you doing that? I mean, for people, raw food eating is very effective for cancer, but I've had about 10 people come to talk to me about doing it, but none of them would end up doing it. They all died but they wouldn't do it because inevitably some family member steps up and said no, because if it was any good, the doctors would know about it. See, the doctors would know about it. They don't want to dare think outside the framework that, okay, if the doctors don't know about it, and then why does this guy know about it? What's wrong with our system? What's wrong with the society? They don't like thinking there. They don't like thinking that far out of the box, and people will just go to their deaths even believing in a false, in a false belief. But because we were raised that way. We were raised to think that our government would never lie to us, and we're finding out that's all they do is lie to us.
Yeah.
See, now it's less excusable than it was 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. Remember, I told you about the congressional investigation of the tax shelters in 1953 when the lawyer, this is a very highly educated, intelligent woman, Catherine Casey, lost her mind. Because you got to remember, in the 50s, that's when it was, the United States was baseball, hot dogs, apple pie, Chevrolet, Yankee Doodle Dandy, the Allies, the good guys. There's no way anything could be bad in the United States. And here she's reading about these elitists who are basically taking it over and disassembling it and indoctrinating the youth. And she lost her mind because she was forced out of the box. It wasn't like Randy or Mark telling, hey, you want to read this. She was reading the minutes of the meetings. All right, her education shows her what she's reading is official documentation of what was said and being planned in the meeting of the Carnegie Endowment Fund, and she couldn't deal with it.
Wow.
So now, okay, fast forward 60 years, we got the internet, we got all sorts. We're inundated with news and bullshit. You got to sift through it all, but nothing's so surprising anymore. So there is still a great level of indoctrination, but I find that more and more people are open. I tell them I eat raw. Yeah, you still get the people who freak out, but then you get other people who don't. And I've had very reasonable answers. People who would say, "No, I don't want to do that, but I'll never say never," which is a very rational response. They'll say, "If I had to, I would." But they go, "I really don't want to do that." I say, "You don't have to do it. You don't have to do it." I said, I do it because of my eyesight, and the fact I think it's the best diet, bar none, for bodybuilding, right?
Yeah.
And I got used to it. I choose to do it, and I think it's very healthy. But there's still that level of indoctrination that is breaking away. People are starting to wake up and realize there's a lot of nonsense out there and a lot of lying going on. And in terms of the vaccinations being shoved down our throats, and now they found out they're really upset now, the pharmaceutical and medical fields, because so many people this year, they did a poll, and the percentage that took vaccines and flu shot dropped dramatically, especially after the garbage scam they pulled off with the H1N1 last year. That was a total dud. There's a lot of money being made off that. And then they exposed that these doctors in the World Health Organization had direct connections to the pharmaceutical companies that are creating the vaccines, Yeah. It's a one great big happy family there. So, but people are waking up and finding out that they're taking these shots and getting sicker than ever.
Yeah. So do you think there's anything we can do to fix it?
I just tell people don't get upset about it. They want you to be fearful. They want you to keep you in fear. That's why the news is nothing but horror stories and stuff like that. Just, I don't know, it's hard to say. Be rational, educate yourself, and just do your thing the best you can in terms of doing the right thing, and eventually it will change. Because, like I said, I do not believe we're going to go into world governing. There's too much greed at the top, and these guys are fighting amongst themselves. And it's just a matter of more and more people are moving to healthier foods, wanting healthier foods, and this is demand. And you get companies that still do want to make money, and if that's what the people want, the supply and demand, the problem is that you get these companies to know what you want, but not to have these corrupt bastards who will say, well, let's just change the labeling and tell them what we have is what they want, and it's not, right? That's the big thing that's going on now, is to stop these guys from lying on the labels and say, hey, I got organic. It's not even close to organic, right?
Yeah.
But the demand is there, and the chefs, even the chefs of the world, are saying our food is crap. When our farmer got caught and raided here with his raw milk, the number of the chefs in Toronto stepped forward and backed him up, said, we want this food. We want high-quality food and raw milk to do our cooking. The government has no right to tell us these things. Nobody has a right to tell another person what they can and cannot take for their health. That's where do they think they got that right to be able to do that? They're not protecting us, especially when it's so obvious behind the scenes. They're protecting their benefactors, and that's the big corporations, right?
Yeah, definitely. So I was going to ask you actually, if it doesn't get fixed, where do you see the world going in nutrition? But you're pretty confident that
there's going to be a big drop off in the populations, because when you sterilize, one thing they do know for a fact, and maybe this is one of their agendas, if you sterilize the food supply, you inevitably sterilize your population. Because Dr. Francis Pottinger showed this back in the 40s when he did his cat study. He couldn't get past the third generation. He fed the cats raw foods, and he fed them cooked processed foods, and the cooked processed food group could not get past the third generation. They went sterile. Well, of course, they had all the diseases we see in our society today. All the skeletal anomalies, all the soft tissue anomalies. But the big thing is, back then they even knew if we didn't secure and procure our food supply, we would be looking at an issue with extinction. Definitely population issues, but it always seems to be the thing about overpopulating and stuff like that. So that's what will happen if we pursue the same course. We're already seeing it. Look at. These guys were predicting it 80 years ago when we had all these orphanages. Now we have all those orphanages. We got like a 6-8 year waiting list to adopt a child, and then we got all these fertility clinics because exactly what they predicted is happening, all this infertility. So that'll just get worse because the kids are being born weaker and weaker and weaker. Plus they got all these kids on Ritalin and all these other drugs. So they have all sorts of issues going on because, and most of them, if they can get pregnant, will have weaker kids, and many of them won't be able to get pregnant. And
I've also just recently saw that GMO foods have a big impact on fertility for male and females as well.
Yeah, everything seems to have a thing on fertility. And again, we can, if you go down that topic and you look at, say, what the guys like Brzezinski and especially Kissinger has written about, Rockefeller, they're all talking about overpopulation. There's a YouTube out there with Gates. Now, some people think it was just a little Freudian slip of his, but I don't think it was. He's on there on YouTube. You could look him up. He's talking about the population going from 6 to 9 billion, but they should be able to, with modern medicine and vaccines, we should be able to drop that by 15%.
Yeah.
So, what's he saying? Okay. That's one of the big scares of people with the vaccines. They think they're trying to use it to control population because Kissinger has written that. In some type of documentation about 30 years ago, it talked about population control through vaccines. I can't remember the name of the document, but there's tons of this stuff out there. But again, you don't have to read or believe in conspiracies. You just see it happening now with all the people who cannot get pregnant.
Yeah.
And the fact that we have all these fertility clinics, and it's just going to get worse if we don't do something in terms of fixing our food supply.
So let me ask you, what motivated and inspired you to tell this story?
I don't know. The book, like I said, officially the book began in 2002, but really when I look at my library here, it actually probably began 30 years ago when I started reading this stuff. Something in the back of my head 20 years ago said I want to write a book, but I remember also when I thought of that, I immediately thought, what are you going to write about? I didn't know at the time, but the book started as just a request from the Weston Price Foundation to do this little blurb on the history of some of the nutrition in bodybuilding, and I thought which would be very easy, but then I found out it wasn't going to be easy at all. I said you can't tell the history of nutrition in bodybuilding without telling the history of bodybuilding, and you can't tell the history of bodybuilding without telling the history of the iron game, and then you get into the whole history of alternative versus orthodox medicine, and all of a sudden now you got this scope and this incredible politics going on. Because when you get into the medicine and you talk about who controls it, now you're talking about the global architects. And you're talking about the same guys who own the oil, the same one that control private banking, pharmaceutical, all that stuff. So it just kind of proliferated. And it's not that I necessarily wanted to tell that story. It just kind of evolved into it. It's, a lot of people are writing about it. And there are a lot of books coming out. I just kind of taken the avenue of the fitness industry. I think the fitness industry's got to wake up. The amount of stuff that bodybuilding and this whole physical fitness boom now, a lot of it arose out of physical culture, which were the early bodybuilders called themselves physical culturists. And for the first 50 years of this 20th century, we were probably the best source of information on health and well-being. It was whole natural foods and exercise. Then the supplement industry came in, and yet many of the original supplements were derived from industrial waste. And that's just the way it was. But they found that there was a lot of money to be made off of it. Now, I'm not calling all supplements today industrial waste. I'm just saying like stuff like brewer's yeast and soy, and even whey protein powder. Whey itself was a biological hazardous waste because they weren't allowed to dump it in water because of its effect on the water. But I'm not saying that whey in itself, like raw whey, is is bad for you, but it was classified that way. But you can argue that soy is not good for you and other things. But my point was that it changed everything. It was so lucrative, financially lucrative, because food. It's one thing to sell a barbell. You sell a barbell, you just lost a customer because he doesn't need to come back for another one, right? You sell him supplements, he's back monthly. So this was a boon to the fitness industry, and it went crazy. It just took off, and now today, everybody who works out thinks all these muscles that come from powders and pills, and it doesn't. It comes from food. And even if you want quality supplements, they have to be derived from quality food sources, right? But a lot of the fitness industry and bodybuilding today, even the natural bodybuilding, are lost in terms of what constitutes real health and well-being. Bodybuilding, especially competitive bodybuilding, is not at all synonymous with good health. Not at all. Anybody can start. The condition that I think the worst thing that they ever did was try to follow the drug guys. Back in the 80s, when they started to get into more GH, GH doesn't make you bigger. It allows you to get leaner. And now suddenly you had the Christmas tree. You're so lean, your lower back and your lats look like a Christmas tree. That the natural guys try to follow this as well, and it's very difficult to get that lean without drugs. And typically, when the result is you look like shit. You're so gaunt and unhealthy. You're sunken cheeks, and it is not a healthy state to be in at all. And that's what basically bodybuilding has become, a starvation contest. And again, and the amount of drugs that the professionals are taking today is absolutely ridiculous. But that's just the way it is. I think they got to wake up and realize that in the fitness industry, they're going to number one they may even lose their supplements if the regulations go through, and that they have to understand the power that's in real, whole, natural foods.
Absolutely. So it was a lot of things that inspired you to write the book?
Nothing inspired me to write the book. I just got dragged into it. Just a lot of people, when I wrote the article, said there's a lot of information. Dr. Maldi Pasquale said, you got a lot of information here. He said he saw it as a book immediately, and Ron Kossoff from Natural Source Products said it should be a book when I wasn't even thinking at all, maybe a pamphlet, something like that. And then it just started growing. All of a sudden, it just took off from there. And suddenly it's no longer one volume. It had to be 2 volumes. Then it had to be 3 volumes. And people just started opening up and talking more. And I just, what I found when I retired, I used to be a computer programmer by trade, but when my eyesight went and retired out of that, it does give me more to do other than just training people. It is fun. In some sense, it's frustrating in some sense, especially trying to get the information in the format that I can read it and deal with it. But it keeps me busy that way. So I probably the inspiration is that it does keep me occupied and busy. Absolutely. And I want to tell the story. I thought, I loved working out ever since I was a kid. I love even though bodybuilding takes a lot of hits and gets criticized a lot. I got a lot out of it. It gave me a lot of fun. So I've invested a lot of my money into this book. And I got angry with one guy out there accused me of he said this book was obviously funded by the Western Price Foundation, which it was not. Nobody gave me any money for it. Price Foundation hasn't even reviewed the book in over 2.5 years. So I've invested thousands of dollars of my own money into it, and it's my contribution back. And I like the fact that so many do appreciate what I've done in terms of trying to get as accurately as I can. Of course, it's history through my lens, right? Everybody who writes is going to look at things from a slightly different perspective. So obviously the book is from my perspective, but I try to get it as accurate as possible.
Absolutely. So is there any other final thoughts or things that you'd like to add?
I think I pretty well this is about maybe one of the longest interviews I've done. I think I pretty well said as much as I can.
Well, excellent.
Without getting into too much of what I'm writing about in my current volume that I hope to have out. I definitely want to have volume 2 out this year. It is going to be the same. So it was originally supposed to be the 1970s and the 1980s. It got too big again. And it's just going to be the 1970s. Arthur Jones is probably 25% of this volume. Arthur's got a small book within a book in this one. And I got some good stuff with Arthur and pumping iron and, right out of the blocks. It's the era of Schwarzenegger and a lot of things going on. I deal with all the issues in the politics and stuff that's going on, some stuff going on behind the scenes, and not as much nutrition in this volume, probably 3 chapters, possibly 4, but that'll pick up more in the next volume again. There'll be more on nutrition and nutrition politics and politics. I'll pick that. Volume 3 will be a combination of volume 1 and 2, where volume 1 was nutrition, politics, and a little bit of politics and a lot of bodybuilding. Volume 2 is a lot of bodybuilding, and number 3 will be a combination of the first 2 again.
Excellent.
But it'll all be around the same. This book here will probably go over 600. It might even be slightly bigger than the first one, which is 562 pages. It'll probably go over 600.
Well, I can't wait to read it. So thank you so much for today, Randy. If you want more information, visit randyroach.ca. I'll just add that I have the book Muscle, Smoke and Mirrors. I did a review on YouTube, so you can check that out. But it is an absolutely fantastic book that is chock-a-blocks full of so much information. I think it starts at the 1850s, the book. Is that right, Randy?
It goes back, theoretically, the first chapter I have fun, I go back a couple thousand years.
A couple thousand years.
But primarily it takes off in the 1800s and mostly the 20th century, up to the end of the 1960s.
So, you're looking at a lot of great information about the history of bodybuilding and nutrition, and it's a very important read to know where things actually started from and came from, because once you know that, you really have the power to make the right decisions and not be trapped by traditions and doing things the one way that perhaps isn't the most effective way of doing things. So again, I'd like to thank you, Randy, for doing this interview, and definitely go check out the book. You can get it on Amazon and randyroach.ca. So check it out, and thanks, Randy.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.